Okay, here we are. We're about to install the Roto-Fab cold air intake on the 2018 Camaro ZL1. And what we're looking at here is the factory air intake system. Looks like a closed system. The filter tucked up in the housing there on the right. And then porting it into the throttle body right there. So we're basically going to be replacing everything from the throttle body all the way through the filter and the housing. And Roto-Fab has good reviews. It's supposed to pick up about 26 wheel horsepower, and it's supposed to allow the supercharger whine to sound a little bit better, a little more audible. So that'll be cool. And I think it'll also look better under the hood. We'll get a before and after shot. But anyway, yeah, that's today's project, and I've never done this before. Hopefully it goes well. We'll see. Okay, and here are the parts for the Roto-Fab intake. There's the housing right there on the left, and then you know, the various fittings and collars and things like that. I had opted to go with the dry filter on the right. You can get an oil filter for this, but here in Las Vegas with lots of dust and stuff like that in the air, it seemed prudent to go with the dry filter, and there's also less maintenance. So yeah, the parts don't look all that complicated, and so hopefully it'll go smoothly. We'll see. All right, the first step, I didn't show this, was to disconnect the negative battery terminal. So you can see that kind of laying down there loose. I've already done it, didn't show it on camera. Not really sure why we needed to do that. It seems like overly cautious to me, but that's what the instructions said to do, so that's what we did. Okay, now we're going to start taking the factory insulation out, and we're going to start with that breather tube right there on the side. It's kind of in shadow, unfortunately, but you can see those little gray tabs on the side of it. I think if I squeeze those, it'll pull out. I can't show it on camera because I can't do it with one hand, but that's the next step. Okay, I kind of skipped ahead a few steps. I went ahead and got the elbow off the throttle body, and also took the air box out. So yeah, I kind of moved ahead a little bit. There's the stock air box, and then the stock intake elbow right there that we've removed, and then we used a zip tie to kind of hold. There was like a little retainer clip right here that went into the stock air box to kind of hold these hoses away from the pulley. So the instructions had us put this zip tie in here to kind of keep it kind of loose, but to allow for motor rock, but to keep these two hoses away from the from that pulley right there, and to allow for just a little bit of space between the hoses. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. I'll have to clip off this end, and then I think we'll be ready to move forward with the install. And there's the inside of the throttle body. So yeah, looking good so far. And then before we start the installation, one thing the instructions had us do, you'll notice these retaining bolts for the carbon fiber hood insert, and you'll notice most of these bolts are 10 millimeter bolts with a washer behind them, but one of them, you'll notice this one I had to replace with a supplied sort of button head hex bolt. It just has a narrower profile than the other bolts. You can see that one sticks down more than that one, and that's because when the hood closes, it's going to close down against the new air box, and I think it's because it needs a little bit more room for the hood to close appropriately. So that was the next step, and I think we're going to be on to the actual install next. Sorry, one thing we had to do before we start the install is we had to get this little breather tube fitting out of the stock intake elbow, and it was held on by this clamp, which I have now mangled. But man, that was a very tight clamp. Fortunately, we don't have to reuse this thing because somebody really did not want that to come off at the factory, I guess. Anyway, we got that clamp off, and that allows us to just pull that breather tube fitting right out of the slot there. And so we're going to reuse this with the new install. Okay, the next step was to get the airbox assembly and to put the MAF housing through the large hole in the airbox assembly and get these half-inch Phillips head bolts and washers. There's 5 of them all the way around. Get those installed, and then it instructed that the MAF housing inlet had to be at about the 10 o'clock or aligned with the bolt hole in the 10 o'clock position, which is appears to be correct, at least looking from this vantage point. So the MAF housing will go, or the MAF sensor will go right through that slot right there. And I guess it has to be in that position, given how the MAF sensor is positioned, right there. So, because that's where it'll end up being once the airbox is installed. So we're going to get these bolts tightened down and then go to the next step. And then the next step was to just simply put the seal on the bottom of the airbox right there. So that'll keep everything nice and reasonably airtight, so it can have maximum throughput through the airbox. There's another seal. So as you can see, I've moved ahead a few steps, but we did get the MAF's housing bolted into the airbox. That's all good. We also got the hump hose clamped onto the end of the MAF's housing and tightened down appropriately, just making sure that there's hose material on both sides of the clamp, because you don't want it to come undone, obviously. And so you can't run the clamp flush to the edge of the hose. You've got to have material on both sides. So it looks pretty good. The next thing we did, I skipped ahead, the breather tube fitting that we took off of the stock assembly, that straight piece on the end, we reused that and put it into this hose with a clamp, and then into the 90-degree fitting, and put that into the intake elbow that came with the kit. And we made sure that we tightened those down hand tight, and then 1 additional revolution so it aligned with the alignment marks on the intake elbow, and it looks like it aligns reasonably well. So that'll be the direction that the hose comes from the intake elbow. So that's that. And then the next step that we did, that I went ahead and did, is I put the hose adapter. I think this is a 4-inch to 4 1/4 inch hose adapter. Went ahead and clamped that on to the end of the throttle body. Again, using just one of those hose clamps, making sure that we've got an appropriate amount of hose material on both sides of the clamp, including underneath, and it looks like we do. So we're in good shape, and we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, the next step is to take the airbox assembly that again has the MAF's housing already installed, and we are going to actually seat this into the engine bay. And the way it seats in there is that there are these 3 grommets. There's one here, there's one here, and then there's one down in here. And these are the factory, this is where the factory airbox mounted, and so the new one goes right into those grommets, and there's studs on the bottom of the new airbox. So we're going to press that into place and see what it looks like. It should start to visually come together after we get this step done. Okay, we've got the airbox pressed down into those grommets. So the filter will go in there, obviously, and you can see it's fully seated into those grommets. It's probably hard to see all of them, but that's how it goes in. It's fully seated, so we're next going to get, we're going to put the 90-degree air intake in place next, and we should be good to go. See, we've got the 90-degree intake installed into the 2 hoses, one on the airbox side, and then the other on the throttle body side. And you can see the hump hose on the airbox side, and then the 4-inch to 4 1/4 inch hose adapter, and then all 4 hose clamps kind of holding everything together. And you can see there's an appropriate amount of material on each side of the hose clamp, including all the way down to the bottom. Same thing on this side. So they're nice and snugged in. And so the next thing is to reattach the breather tube, which is kind of sitting out of the way right there right now. It's got to go into that fitting that we prepared. So we're going to do that now, and then we'll come back. So now the breather fitting is reinstalled, and I did rotate the fitting just a little bit outward away from the belt there, and you can see that the hose seems to be appropriately secured. You know, it's in this little clip right here, and then it looks like it's safely away from the belt and the pulley. So I think we're in pretty good shape, and it is in fact kind of clicked into place. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. And the next step that we did was we went ahead and reinstalled the MAF sensor into the MAF sensor housing using the 2 supplied Phillips screws. Those are, remember we did not reuse the old bolts that held the MAF sensor into the stock housing. So those 2 Phillips screws were supplied with the kit. I'm not sure what to do with the this was a clip that was kind of clipped onto the stock housing. I don't know if I might need to maybe zip tie that onto the existing cable there, but I'll see if the instructions say anything about that. And the next step is to put the seal on the top of the airbox, this thing here, so we'll do that and come back in just a minute. Okay, we went ahead and put the seal on the top of the airbox, and we installed the filter and tightened down the clamp. And so the install is now done. The only thing really left to do is to reconnect the negative terminal of the battery. And I'm just going to kind of double check in here. I've got all my connections redone. Looks like all the hoses are secure. It looks like we're in pretty good shape. I'm going to go ahead and you can see that's nice and firm. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect the negative terminal to the battery. We're going to crank it up and see how it runs. Okay, we've got the negative battery terminal reconnected, and so now it's time to crank it up and see how she sounds. Okay, the moment of truth. Let's give it a crank.
Low battery.
All right, all the gauges look good. In particular, the one on the right there, which is the manifold pressure, the intake pressure. It should be at a slight vacuum at idle, which it is. And let's see. Everything looks good. Plenty of clearance on the pulley and the drive belts. Alright, now let's just close the hood and make sure that everything fits like it should. We're going to do it slow first, just to yep. Everything seats in there nice. Let's see. All right, that looks good. Installation complete.